This episode is sponsored by the Expert Services Directory. Are you a coach, consultant, speaker, or trainer who wants to sell your services to corporate clients across the UK, but you're booking fewer than 5 qualified sales calls from your lead generation each month? Or finding that all of your inbound inquiries are coming from junior employees in firms who just want to benchmark your pricing rather than actually introduce you to the real decision maker who has the buying power to get you in? And you really want to generate real qualified inbound inquiries from decision makers in organisations around the UK who actually have buying power and want to purchase your services as an external supplier? Well, that is exactly what the Expert Services Directory is for. And if you visit www.expertservicesdirectory.com and sign up now, you can generate qualified corporate leads for 12 whole months by being part of the Expert Services Directory, where we proactively market specialist providers just like you to real decision makers in companies across the UK who are ready to buy from external suppliers. And if you use the code podcast at checkout, all caps, you'll also get a free corporate priorities calendar that you can use to understand exactly what decision makers are prioritising at each point in the year so that you can create solutions that sell all year round as well. All you have to do is visit www.expertservicesdirectory.com and enter the code podcast, all in capital letters, at the checkout now. Right, let's get back to the episode. Welcome to the Selling to Corporate podcast, where we're going to be challenging your sales beliefs around selling to corporate organizations and help you increase your bottom line profits every single month. I am Jessica Lorimer, your sales expert and guide in this world of selling to corporate companies, skyrocketing your company sales and making the impact that you really want in the world. Now, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show today, please do head over to iTunes and leave us a review. But enjoy this episode, and I am really looking forward to sharing some epic sales wisdom with you. Okay, here we are. It is May officially. And we're in the month, if you're in the UK, where you get 2 bank holidays. Yay! I'm very excited about this. It is something that I always look forward to. A couple of long weekends where hopefully the weather starts to turn and it gets sunny. Alternatively, I'm recording this obviously earlier than May, but alternatively, it could be that we end up having the entire Great British summertime in the last 2 weeks of April and then it rains for the rest of the year. Nobody knows, and that's part of the fun. But wherever you are in the world, wherever you're listening, I hope that you have a phenomenal start to May. And that is because we're almost in summer season. Isn't that exciting and terrifying? And for those of you who are thinking, oh, yeah, okay, Jess, whatever, I'm just going to remind you gently that May is the 5th month of the year, the 5th. And that next month, in many different places, children will be off on their summer holidays, which means for those of you who are working parents, and I know that tons of you are, who listen to the podcast and who work with me, you are going to need to be spending some time thinking about how your business is going to operate whilst life gets busy and hectic. And also for those of you who, like me, don't have children, you're going to need to start thinking about the ways that you're going to communicate with decision makers and wrap up sales processes before that summer holiday period comes in where it's difficult to talk to people because they're not in the office, right? So if you are in any of my programs, you'll know that I talk about the dates for final things happening and when to close off sales processes and things like that. This is something that is really important and that you do need to think about now. And I know that this year I've heard from more people than ever that 2026 hasn't started in the way they expected, or that they got into gear a bit more slowly than normal. All of those things are fine, but I can tell you that if you don't take action now, the summer holidays are going to hit and you're going to have 6 to 8 weeks where decision making is slower, and where you are going to have to spend some time and energy and graft working to make sure that your Q4, so that September onwards period, is really strong. Now, this is not for me to scare you at all. So if you're listening to this and thinking, oh my God, if I don't sell anything to corporates now, I'm absolutely screwed until September. It isn't the case, but it does mean you need to put some serious work in. And I'm not going to shy away from that. I also want to take a quick second here because this year the podcast has been slightly different. I've been doing episodes on just deeper topics, which has been really, really interesting. It's had a really interesting response from some people. The response has been choosing not to listen anymore, which I'm not offended by. I think that everybody should spend their valuable time, a resource that you can't get back, on listening and doing things that actually add value to yourself, your business, your life. So for those people, I'm totally not offended by that decision. I think good for you. Have boundaries, win. From other people, I've had messages who've said, actually, these episodes have been really powerful for me and really useful in reminding me of the things that I actually need to do and where I need to spend my time and energy and focus. And I really appreciate everyone who's reached out and let me know that, and let me know that these episodes are useful, because it's kind of weird when you record a podcast in that it's strange. When I record the episodes, it feels like I'm talking to friends. But it also is this weird kind of one-dimensional relationship because you don't hear from everybody who listens to the podcast. So it feels like you're talking into the ether. And so when I do get messages on LinkedIn or by email from people who say, hey, actually, this thing from this episode was really useful, or this thing from this episode made me think differently about X, that helps me know what resonates and what's going to be useful for you as we move on. And that's always really, really exciting. So thank you if you have dropped me a message or an email, because it, honestly incentivizes me to record more things that are useful and that you will benefit from, as opposed to, I don't know what the other option is, not talking to myself every couple of weeks and feeling weird about it. So, thank you very much. But as we steam forward into May, there are a few things that we still need to cover off before, like I say, that summer slump happens. And this really isn't about you need to panic, everything is going to slow down, you're not going to get any clients before September. It's really not the case. But we do need to start talking about the activities that really are a priority now, because otherwise there's this strange temptation for people to focus on things that absolutely are not critical and will add absolutely no value to their sales process right now. That doesn't mean that those tasks or activities are never valuable, but it does mean that people have this tendency, especially as the weather gets better, we get a couple of long weekends, we start to relax a little bit, that we focus on those jobs that maybe we just think are more fun or a bit nicer, or just, give us, I don't know, instant gratification in some way, but don't actually make money. So this is my friendly reminder not to do that. And the episodes in May and in June will be all around things that you actually need to focus on or need to avoid spending time on so that you can make the right business decisions for you. And that's really, really important. So before we get into this episode, I will say that the Expert Services Directory sponsors this podcast and episode. I'm very excited about that. If you have been, I don't know, living under a really sunny rock, you may not have heard about the Expert Services Directory. But if you are a coach, a consultant, speaker or trainer, and you want to be selling to more organisations in the UK, then the Expert Services Directory should absolutely be something that you're considering. Now, at the time that this episode airs, the Expert Services Directory has had a little bit of a shift because we have now got a lot of amazing suppliers who are involved with the directory. And to keep the directory being a premium resource of the absolute best suppliers so that we can help get more visibility for those suppliers on their listings and help them partner with more amazing companies around the UK, we've moved it to being application only. Ta-da! How exciting is that? it feels really exciting for me, obviously. And it's very exciting news for the directory. But you will notice if you have gone and looked at the directory that we have opened applications for new suppliers at the moment. And that's really important because we only take 10 suppliers in each specialism and location. Now, that means that unlike lots of traditional directories, I don't know if you remember the Yellow Pages, maybe not everybody is as old as me, but if you remember the Yellow Pages, you will know that they would have thousands and thousands and thousands of plumbers or builders or taxi drivers or archaeologists or accountants or literally anything that they could find, they would put in. And they would send round this big book to pretty much every house in the UK. I used to use mine as a doorstop. But they would send around this big book to every house in the UK once a year. And then pretty much every supplier who had a business name that began with A would get called, but everybody else wouldn't because, you were never going to flick through to like V or something. The book was huge. So unlike the Yellow Pages, the Expert Services Directory is not a resource for all suppliers. Instead, we cap the listings so that we've got 10 excellent suppliers in each specialism and location. And that means that when we're focused on marketing suppliers out to organisations, we're able to focus on the USPs that you actually have. Making sure that your business is visible to the right organisations by featuring you in the right way. That's really, really important. So if you have been thinking about joining the Expert Services Directory, applications are now open. We do have limited spots in each category. In fact, leadership in London is completely gone. So if you are thinking about wanting to be part of the London category for the Expert Services Directory, definitely drop me a message or get yourself an application form filled out because that is going super, super quickly. All right, let's move on to the topic in this episode, which is all around bids and tenders. And I'm going to say some things here that a lot of people probably won't like, so I guess buckle up. Now, the world of bids and tenders is really interesting to me. I come from a sales background. When I started out in recruitment, we worked with a lot of organisations. And I think it's important to talk in this episode about A, what bids and tenders actually are and what they involve, and B, what use they actually serve. Okay? Because when I started out in the world of recruitment, I was fortunate. I started working for a really large organisation. And as a result, they had preferred supplier agreements with a lot of organisations, particularly in the financial services space. I didn't start out recruiting in the financial services space. I actually started out recruiting in the public sector and not-for-profit division. Specifically, my job was recruiting technology professionals for public sector and not-for-profit organisations. And it was really galling for me because every day I would walk into work knowing that my job was going to be new business development, exactly like you're doing now. And that meant that my job was going out and trying to get organisations who, even though we were a big company, didn't know us, didn't know me, didn't trust us, didn't know that we had great candidates, and trying to get them to use us. And that was really hard. It felt really difficult. The reason it felt difficult was A, because doing new business development is challenging. B, I was brand new at it, so I didn't know how it worked yet and hadn't figured out my system. And C, because every day I would walk into the office and I was sat right next to the people who were recruiting in the financial services industry, where our company had all of these preferred supplier agreements. And they'd be like, oh my gosh, Jess, I've got like 15 jobs that I need candidates for today. Oh my gosh, this company over here has just sent us 30 jobs that we need to recruit for right now. And I was like, oh yeah, brilliant. That's really good. The local NHS trust that I'm working with, they still hate me. And it was tough. So I think that for me, starting out, I thought, oh my goodness, if I can just hold out long enough in the public sector and not-for-profit industries, and then somehow wait for somebody who's doing all this financial services stuff to leave, maybe I can have a go at these PSA agreements or PSL agreements and sourcing candidates for that, because it'll be so much easier. Roll on about 6 months when I'd figured out what I was doing and started billing and started seeing the constraints that my colleagues were under. You couldn't have paid me enough money to move. But that's not necessarily a popular opinion. And I think it's important to talk about that in today's episode so that by the end of this episode, you can make up your own mind and think about, okay, what kind of business do I, as a coach, a consultant, a speaker, or a trainer, want? Do I want something that is driven by bids, tenders, and preferred supplier agreements? Or do I want something that is driven by new business? It's also worth pointing out you can have a combination of the two, but we'll talk about why that might logistically be a bit of a challenge throughout the episode. So let's buckle in. I am going to give a lot of different thoughts over the course of this episode. Take some notes, see how you feel, and if you like it, drop me a little message. Let me know. Okay, so let's go back to my early career and that feeling of it's so unfair because all of my colleagues have all these opportunities that they can just send the best candidate for. And let's just start there and think about what a preferred supplier agreement or a bid or tender process actually is. Because on the surface of it, when you say it and you say, oh yeah, it's, this opportunity that you have where organisations have already talked within themselves about what it is that they want, and they just put it out onto a portal and everybody sends their best thing, best solution, best candidate, whatever product, service, etc. idea. It sounds kind of cool. You're like, great, well, I'll just fill those out for a bit and then I'll probably get something. And that's not necessarily what one of these processes looks like. So the first thing we need to understand is what actually is a preferred supplier agreement, a bid, or a tender. They're actually quite different things. Okay, so sometimes in the wider market, we hear people use the language interchangeably. And it's really, really important that you don't get caught in that trap because these are not always interchangeable processes. For example, a preferred supplier agreement is an agreement that an organisation, generally larger organisations or those in the public sector, they will have a procurement team who has decided that they have specific commercial needs within their organisation. And that will be for things like coaching, consulting, recruitment, lots and lots of different things. And so they will know that each year they have a need for these types of services. And what they will usually do, this procurement team, is they will go out to market through a range of ways. They'll ask for referrals internally. They will go to market themselves and do some sourcing, etc. But they'll go to market. They will generate relationships with external suppliers and they'll say, we want you to be on our preferred supplier list or be part of our preferred supplier agreement in this area. Here's generally the amount of work or spend that we will have in this area for this time period. So it's usually an annual agreement. And we would like you to be part of it, but we are going to expect a discount because you're going to be on our preferred supplier list. So we are going to encourage decision makers internally to use you, and we're going to say that you should be the first point of call. And for that, we expect a discount. Okay, so generally, that is what a preferred supplier agreement or list looks like. It is you being the first point of call for a service along with, and this is really important, along with multiple other providers at usually a heavily discounted rate than your normal services. Okay? Now, bids and tenders are slightly different. These tend to come up more in public sector organisations, And that's not limited to the UK, by the way. That's a global thing. And they'll have different limits. So generally what will happen for something like a bid or a tender process will be an organisation has a specific financial limit where they have to go out and get multiple quotes so that they are getting the best value or the best deal or the best fit. And we typically see that, or the best example of that really is the public sector in the UK, or like I say, anywhere around the globe, public sector environments. They will generally have some kind of website where they'll say, we are putting X project out to tender, this is the anticipated spend, and they will have a form that can be filled in, and they will ask for multiple details about your business, about various things. So it could be about your capacity, it could be about any associates that you might operate with, it could be even in some cases credit checks and stuff like that on your business, etc. But they will put out a tender agreement and they'll say, this is the amount of money we're looking to spend, this is what we are looking to spend that money on. Everyone who's interested, apply. Kind of like getting a grant from or a funding from an external source. Bids are pretty similar. Okay, so in the world of bids, the process is similar in that organisations will generally have that spend available, be looking for specific suppliers or one supplier to support a project or programme of work. But the bid itself is your response, if you like. It's the proposal that's actually submitted. And that's basically where you would outline exactly how you'll meet all of the requirements. Okay, so the tender process is what the organisation is putting forward and saying this is exactly what we want and these are the criteria. The bid is the response that is being sent back by the supplier. Okay, that's why sometimes people will use the term interchangeably. Like I say, they're not interchangeable, but sometimes there's confusion around what they actually are. Okay, they don't have the same meaning. And if you are confused about it, you can always remember tender is the invite to be a supplier. The bid is your response to that invitation. Okay. So when we start looking at preferred supplier agreements, bids and tenders, and especially how you can find them, people get really excited because people think, oh my gosh, there are these websites. And the UK and other nations do have this, particularly, like I say, with public sector organisations. They will have websites or portals that you can go on and you can fill out forms proactively and get the ability to be a preferred supplier. You can go on UK government websites, for example, and see exactly what they're putting out to tender at the moment. You can go to local council websites and you can see what they're tendering and how much for. And so people get really excited because they're like, oh my gosh, well, you know, there's a specific county council who are paying £15,000 for coaching. I'm going to go and submit 6 of those bids today and see what I get. Unfortunately, you would not be alone in doing that. And unfortunately, a business cannot be sustained on being a preferred supplier for organisations and operating at significant discount, or submitting bids for pieces of work. And it's interesting because I know some people out there will teach it as an entire method for selling to companies. And it's not to say that you will never put in a bid for work, whether it's for a public or private sector organisation. It's not to say that you should automatically discount all tender processes as being non-viable. But it is to say that it is a very, very, very competitive environment, and there are things that you need to know before you go into those situations so that you can judge whether or not that's the best place to spend your time and energy, which is or are both limited resources, right? So now that we understand what we're talking about in this world of preferred supplier agreements or bids and tenders, what we have to understand also is the type of sales process that goes alongside this. And I think that this is where, when I started, when I was junior in sales as a junior recruiter, seeing all these things come through on portals, and I was having to do a lot of cold calling, if I'm honest, and talk to people who really didn't want to talk to me and try and sell the value of working with me versus working with our competitors and things like that. I was really jealous, because I just wanted the ease and the convenience of, here are these jobs, go fill them with the best candidates. It seemed so easy. It sounded so easy. And then when I started watching my colleagues having to literally fight for every single opportunity, I would watch my colleagues get contracts through and portal invitations through for roles that were so easy to fill that they would feel like if they didn't respond within the first 8 minutes, that they would lose the opportunity. 8 minutes. If they were out at lunch, they'd freak out if they got back and got tender requests or PSA requests because they'd be like, oh my God, we've missed the window. That is how competitive it was in 2011. So imagine, with the expansion of technology, of awareness around things like bids, tenders, and preferred supplier lists and agreements, just how much more competitive it is now. That's important to know if this is something, or if this is a strategy that you're considering, that it is competitive with a capital C. Now, the other thing that we have to consider is that even when organisations have preferred supplier lists and agreements, and anyone who is listening to this who's ever worked in procurement, I know you're going to hate me, but you're also going to know it's true. Just because those organisations have preferred supplier lists, preferred agreements with suppliers, or even put out bids and tenders, doesn't mean that that is always who they end up using. And that's for a few reasons. Sometimes it's because the actual product, service, supplier that they want is really specialist, and their existing preferred suppliers or agreements don't actually have those specialisms. So years ago, there were specific types of software developers and specific programming languages that in the UK, people just weren't learning. And it meant that when organisations wanted specific coding languages or programming languages, they had to look out internationally and find candidates internationally, because we just didn't have those resources and that talent available in the UK. So preferred supplier agreements and things went out of the window when it came to sourcing those specialist skill sets. And that still happens now, right? That still happens. So if you are in a very niche area, you might find that actually you never end up on a preferred supplier agreement, or you end up on loads because they're like, oh my gosh, we really need this niche thing. Because your skills are really specialist, or your product or service is really specialised, and they don't have that in their existing preferred supplier agreements. It's also worth noting that sometimes, particularly in the case of tender processes, organisations will have very warped ideas of what they want to pay and what they want to get for that money versus what they can actually achieve. So sometimes these processes can actually be used as benchmarking, which is great for an organisation because they get to go out, they get to sense check, is the price that we're thinking about paying right? Are we actually going to get the right suppliers, the right service, the right level, quality, etc.? And sometimes they are absolutely on track and sometimes they are absolutely not. But for suppliers participating in those processes that are often lengthy, time-consuming, information-heavy, requirements-heavy, to then be used essentially as a benchmarking exercise is really frustrating. Complete waste of time. And finally, it's because a lot of organisations and decision makers within them have pre-existing relationships with people like me and like my clients who have been using strategic business development techniques and strategic, I'm going to call it passive lead generation techniques to build those relationships and showcase the areas of specialism that they have that they wouldn't necessarily get from other providers. So that by the time something goes to tender, that specific decision maker is able to say, well, here are the key skill sets that we need. And we know that this person or this business has exactly those skill sets. And because they have a relationship with that supplier, they're able to write down very specific wording. They're able to discuss very specific transformations, very specific levels of service that other suppliers or organisations who were submitting bids for that work wouldn't know about and therefore wouldn't cover and therefore wouldn't get allocated. Right? That one, for me, is the major reason that I don't go and scroll through government websites to win or try and win bids and tenders. Because a lot of the time, those tender processes are based on decision makers having already had conversations, having already built relationships, already having a really good idea of what they want and, more importantly, who they want to use. So if you're just randomly going through the website and thinking, yeah, but my service is amazing, and not thinking, do I have a prior relationship here? Do I have any visibility here? Do I have any specialist skills that they're talking about or that I know about that maybe they're not disclosing on the document but that would be valuable? You're already missing a trick. And you're already at a disadvantage to suppliers who, like I say, have been building those relationships, have been having those discussions, have been part of supporting decision makers to even build out what they want. And that's a problem, right? So my biggest issue is not that these things don't exist, not that they're not easy to access or find. It's that the time and energy you have to spend if you don't already have a relationship trying to fulfill the obligations of a tender or of a preferred supplier agreement are extensive and often unreliable. Because if you don't have that relationship, prior knowledge, etc., it's really, really difficult to get that signed off. So there are very, very few people who will win bids and tenders just because they found something that looked like they might be able to do it or it might be a good fit on a website. It's very, very, very low. Okay. It's also worth noting, because you might be thinking, well, that's fine, Jess, I'll just go and get on some preferred supplier agreements and then go and talk to decision makers at organisations. Oh, my friend, au contraire. Often, when these preferred supplier agreements are put in place, you're not allowed to go and proactively approach decision makers in organisations. So often, and this is the case particularly for larger organisations, procurement teams will take a really dim view of that. And so they'll actually say, if you're on our preferred supplier agreement, we will only accept you getting in touch when an opportunity is there and valid. We don't accept internal networking of the account generally, right? Now, that's really important to know, because what inexperienced people sometimes do is go and get themselves on preferred supplier agreements, be wooed by the idea that an organisation might spend, I don't know, £100,000 on coaching per year, and think, great, I'm just going to go and talk to some decision makers in the organisation, see what's popping. That was see what's popping. Wow. I'm so middle-aged that I'm laughing at myself because I don't think that is a phrase I could use anymore. But anyway, see what's going on inside the organisation and talk to these decision makers about what coaching I can provide proactively. And they can actually get themselves kicked off of preferred supplier agreements for doing that, right? So you might be starting to see a theme here. And it's the theme that I saw when I was younger, cooler, and, probably less interested in new business development. But the theme was, it seems really easy, but actually there's an awful lot of work underneath. And that's not always how it's sold, right? It's not sold like that by the people who are saying, pay us loads of money to teach you how to put together a slide deck, a pitch deck, a proposal deck, a capacity statement, whatever else you need to go and do and submit these bids and tenders. But it's also presented by internal teams and organisations as being the easy way to work with them too, right? Even though they know it's not. Because if you are on a preferred supplier list or you do engage in a tender process, there is a lot to go through. And the timelines, whilst they say they're clear on tender invitations and things, often aren't met. And so for a lot of people, they'll work 3 months, 6 months on getting onto preferred supplier lists or agreements. They'll wait for a tender invitation to come out. They'll spend another 3 months filling out documentation, going through requirements, submitting and talking to procurement teams, and potentially having to do pitches and things like that, only for the timelines not to be met or for a project to get shelved. There's so little control. And something, like I say, on the surface that looks so easy, actually very time consuming, very little control, lots and lots of variables. And in the meantime, gives you a false pipeline. And I hear it from people a lot who say to me, oh, Jess, I've bid on 3 contracts and they're all worth 60 grand each, and I'd have to do X amount of work for them all. And I'm worried that they'll all come off and that I won't be able to cope, I won't have capacity. And then I'll speak to those same people who in 3 months' time have said, tender process isn't running to time, they're cutting down the rate, they're asking for further discounts, they've seen a load of things from other suppliers that they really like and now want me to incorporate, but at the same price, and it's going to be so low on profit for me. Again, it's not to say don't do it. It's not to say that you'll never submit a bid or a tender. It's to say, go in eyes wide open. And for me, and for my business, and right from when I was in recruitment and saw, my friends and colleagues having to jump through all these hoops, I started thinking, well, actually, that's not the easy win that everybody thinks it is. And actually, the lack of control felt really scary to me. That felt much more scary to me at 21 than cold calling a few people and, having sales processes that at least I was in control of, that at least I could run. Being able to build relationships with anyone in an organisation, because I wasn't on a preferred supplier agreement where I was going to either have to give a heavily discounted rate or not be able to talk to anyone and be penalised if I was talking to anyone, potentially ruining the relationship for the whole company, not even just me. For me, I wanted and prioritised, and still do, and advise my clients on the same, to take as much control over the sales process as possible. Okay? And that is because the more control you have, the more stable your pipeline is, the more control you have over conversion, the more control you have over timelines, the more control you have over managing the expectations of potential clients, and actually the better relationships you build, the more consultative you can be. So it's not to say that bids and tenders don't work entirely. It's not to say that they aren't a happy bonus if you do get asked by an organisation who you've been building a relationship with proactively and they say, hey, look, this actually comes in at a budget level that we would have to go out to tender for. So we'd really like you to bid for that work. And they're willing to have conversations with you about your specialist skill set, and they're willing to build that relationship with you. And so you've got forward knowledge over what it is that they're looking for, and you can tailor your bid appropriately, that you should avoid it. Absolutely not. If you've got those great relationships and you're asked and you can create those specialist skills and articulate them and you know that you've got forward knowledge, that can be really, really great and work out really, really well. But if you don't have those things, sure, apply for a couple. Play the game in the same way that every so often I buy a scratch card or a lottery ticket. If I won, it'd be a cool bonus, a cool story. But it's not what I rely on for my monthly, quarterly, or annual income. I wouldn't buy 10 scratch cards a week and expect to be able to pay my mortgage on that. And that's the difference. That's what we're talking about. Controllable sales processes that are created by you, run by you, and activated and converted by you, versus sales processes that you have little to no control over, are asked to do a lot of work up front for, and don't have a relationship or any relationships internally that you can leverage to give yourself more chance of converting. That's what we're talking about. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you have, obviously do drop me a line, drop me an email, or, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm posting probably twice a week currently, as I'm recording this currently. So I'm active there, and I respond to messages and things now after taking my little LinkedIn break last year. But if you have enjoyed today's episode, you found it useful, or it's given you food for thought, please drop me a line, let me know. And like I say, if you are somebody who's looking to build more of these types of relationships for bigger contracts of work, because, tenders, tender processes and preferred supplier agreements absolutely can give you access to big contracts. Or if you just want to build more relationships with decision makers around the UK, applications are now open for the Expert Services Directory. And it would be great to see applications from credible experts who genuinely have lots of skill, lots of ability, and genuine expertise that they can use to create transformations inside organisations. So if that is you, if you're a coach, a consultant, speaker, or trainer who is a genuine expert and wants to make transformations happen inside organisations around the UK, make sure you head over to the expertservicesdirectory.com and pop your application in now. I'll see you in the next step.